exchange for the full legalization of DACA, Dream is currently residing in the US. Without further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister to open this debate within the next 7 minutes. Stay here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the affirmative side is happy to make a political concession or a trade-off between a meaningless monument on the Mexican border in order to save the people facing immense harm and fear towards their security under the status quo. Because the political policy-making stands not for principle itself, but for the practical benefits for the people on the ground. Now, with that being said, I'm going to firstly clearly state the model and contextualize the debate on the premise of where this debate happens. So the Democratic Party is going to make a concession to the Republican Party, as the motion says. So they will trade in DACA in order to allowing the Republican Party to make a wall against the Mexican border. But this wall probably is not a full-scale wall because of the following reasons. So the United States recently decided that they will build a wall on the Mexican border by using the US budget because Mexico is continuing to refuse to pay for it. So the US decided to do this with their own budget, but since the budget is limited, we don't think the full-scale walls, as Donald Trump says, would be made. Secondly, as a condition, we think that normal immigration policy or refugee policy cannot be introduced or be loosened because this is against the Republican Party's stance anyway, plus it's quite similar in content. These policies are quite similar in contents to DACA. That's why we don't think there could be other alternatives. So the burden of proof of both sides is that we would prove to you that why DACA is more important for the Democratic Party and the US citizens, and they cannot, the opposition cannot suddenly come up and say that DACA is a bad idea, we can't abandon it. So that is where the debate happens and what both teams has to protect. Number one, I'm going to talk about why DACA is practically important for these immigrants in the US society, especially some industries. So it happens in two folds. Number one, protection of fundamental human rights and security is on stake on DACA, not yet. Where these people come from, like people protected by DACA, who are these people? So often they come from, these illegal immigrants come from the poorest parts from the world, like Haiti, which is already a least developing country, recently decimated by an earthquake. Or India, where a large portion of the population is still living below the poverty line. Or Middle East, where Muslim minorities are being discriminated. These people come to the United States to seek shelter and opportunities. That's why these people are called dreamers. So when these people come, not yet, they will be happy to work with even low-wage jobs because they can make a living, they can buy food and shelter. And if they succeed in education, they can receive a better living by going into a better job. And if this opportunity is deprived from them, what will happen? Number one, simply these people may not be able to stay in the US because they'll be sent back as an illegal immigrant. So they have to live in their original country and under desperation, or they simply have to go into vain. Or they have to choose to stay as an illegal immigrant, so they cannot receive any medical treatment or fundamental education, which is already inhumane. But also, because they want to make a living, these people may engage in gang organizations or other criminal activities, which keeps the ill situation for these people also harming the society. Also, we think DACA is benefiting the US industry and the society as well for two reasons. Number one, because these illegal immigrants originally would engage into cheap and nasty jobs, which most Americans tend to avoid, which is very low paid, like in McDonald's, where they collect garbages and so forth, even low paid white people tend to avoid. And secondly, certain industries like IT, they appreciate a lot towards the ability of, for example, illegal immigrants with Indian descent because they have a very good ability. That's why both the illegal immigrants and the US society is actually benefiting from this. Now moving on to my second argument, why DACA cannot be kept by simply the Democratic Party simply insisting, not yet, for it. So two analyses. Number one, in both the upper and lower house, the majority is the Republican Party. So in terms of number, it will be extremely difficult for the Democratic Party to simply pass DACA. And since the Democratic Party and the Trump administration is currently refusing or against immigrants, or like their for various exclusion policy, they wouldn't simply be swayed by the democratic logic. Secondly, which is more importantly, this DACA policy is about to expire in this July. So there is urgent need, first off. Secondly, if the Republican keeps refusing this DACA, this would be simply expired, and it will be extremely difficult for the Democratic Party to revive this kind of policy in order to protect the illegal immigrants. If you have POI, yes.
So when Trump requires Democrats to decrease the budget for DACA to expand the wall, how to enforce the DACA itself?
Oh, okay. So the motion says that this will be full legalization of DACA. So this is, we don't think that's what the motion says. On top of that, DACA doesn't require that much money. It's just allowing immigrants to be registered to seek security. So we don't think, even if DACA's budget could be decreased for a bit, it doesn't really harm the policy itself. That's why it's relevant. So lastly, why concession is not a harm, or rather a preferable trade-off for the Democratic Party. So number one, on a practical basis, as I have talked to you in the introduction, because there is a budget constraint to build a wall, the wall on the Mexican border will not be a full-scale wall. So this will just work as a pose for the Republican Party and the Trump administration, and no realistic deterrence or threat to the Mexican border. Secondly, more importantly, on a principle basis, we think that the Democratic Party, it doesn't really make sense for politicians to stick to the integrity or the consistency of their political stance when people being harmed or people who are going to be expensed are the most vulnerable in the society. So we should go after a pragmatic benefit in this particular situation, because there is a trade-off. Not only, policy making is not only about principle, but it's actually for the people on the ground, because those people are the very people who empower politicians to stay in that. So there's clear reciprocity. So when political integrity and pragmatic benefit is on a trade-off, we think clearly the latter should be taken, especially when people are being treated inhumanely or people are facing a clear threat that they cannot no longer live or pursue their dreams or security. For those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, the motion stands. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech. Next, I call upon the Leader of Opposition to open their case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on opposition believe that we are in a unique context within the United States, that Republicans are falling apart pretty damn literally. We think this debate as Democrats means that as the Democratic Party, what election strategies we should take. And we think it is not good, and it's just a bad strategy for us to look like we are complicit with the symbol of stupidity of the Trump's legislation. And that is why we say that we oppose this motion. Ladies and gentlemen, we would say that all the benefits coming from our government would probably actualize in a couple of years. And therefore we think that it's better for the Democrats to not lose its credibility. And then we can actually have the pragmatic benefits that they talk about. Now, stance of opposition is pretty damn clear in this debate. We think that in the context that Republicans are pretty damn falling apart, we think we should go with our full principles and not look like we are actually giving up some of their views. We don't support a trade-off. So what we say is that we will push for no walls. We will also push for DACA. We will also push for other traditional democratic policies, like more education for the poor, like helping a lot of vulnerable people, like providing Medicaid to a lot of people, and all these kind of important things. Now, I'm going to talk about two things. Firstly, I'm going to analyze the context of of what's going to really going to happen, or the moderate and the reasonable context of what's going to happen in the next election. And second, I'm going to talk about why we think this government's case loses the credibility of the Democrats. But before going into it, let me just give you a couple of rebuttals to what we heard from Hergla. Now, first thing they have told us that DACA is very, very important. It saves a lot of people's lives, and that is really good. Pragmatically, it's good. But we say that as they have analyzed, currently, right now, the parliament is actually ruled mostly by Republicans. So meaning that even if we have the full legalization of DACA, we think it will have like a real weird bureaucratic methods in order to apply for the DACA. So in the same way as, like for example, the United States failed to give out citizenships to volunteers who fought with the United States Army as interpreters in Iraq. Like thousands of them were there, and only 3 of them were actually applied for the citizenship. Like that, we think that there's going to be strict bureaucratic problems with it because the Republicans are the ones who enforce that rule. So they have to tell us that why immediately by taking this stance, these pragmatic benefits are going to materialize. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we just don't think that DACA is like the top priority for the Democratic Party in the first place. So simply unreasonable for Hergla to push that burden on it down. We say yes, it is indeed an important part, but also Democrats push for other reasonable things like opposing segregation of Islamic people and all these other important things. Ladies and gentlemen, because this debate is about how Democrats should act, ladies and gentlemen, a government burden was to tell us why DACA is an election-winning issue in the next political debate. Now sit down. Let's move on to the first issue about the context. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a high chance that Democrats would win more seats than the Republicans, or get closer, or really get a political advance in the upcoming elections. First of all, we think Trump himself is losing consultants and friends, like he's actually firing his friend Tillerson. Also, we see that all his other friends are resigning, including the boss of FBI, ladies and gentlemen. Also, there's a book criticizing Trump's regime stupidity coming from the inside of the White House. And the White House is also not cooperative with Trump, seeing how it took 5 days for the White House to officially announce something about Jerusalem after Trump has actually announced something about the recognition of Jerusalem, considering how important this issue is. Also, we think Trump has actually supported gun control, ladies and gentlemen, after the mass shooting that recently happened in America. In this context, a lot of politicians within the party are not following him, ladies and gentlemen, and all these kind of bad things are happening. So the chances are, we say, that the floating votes would probably go to Democrats or third parties, and also we think that because in every election area the Republican Party puts out multiple candidates, so even the Republican supporters votes would be scattered among these people, and there's a fair chance of the Democrats winning. So why do we think this policy of the government loses the credibility of the Democrats? Because we simply say that this concept of building a wall is a symbol of Trump's stupidity, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's even though it's not a full-scale war, it still costs trillions of dollars, ladies and gentlemen, because we're building a wall across the 1,000 kilometers across the borders. I'll sit down later. Also, this wall is going to be ineffective because they're not having the full scale. People who can literally pass by, ladies and gentlemen. This money could be used in other ways, ladies and gentlemen, like saving a lot of people's lives through Medicaid and education and all these kind of things. So there's going to be a principal concession made by the Democrats, and that's going to be looked back by the public. Yes, sir.
The Republican has a majority, but they're having difficulty passing their own agenda. Why a slight majority of the Democrats can guarantee just because they win the next election on a slight basis?
If it is slight, obviously, the fact that even if it is slight, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that they're still having a majority, you have a lot more bargaining power, we think you can win a lot more. Now sit down. We think, ladies and gentlemen, in this kind of situation, the views of the public are going to be what the Democrats are now making stupid concessions. They're taking part of the stupid policy of Trump. Why do we have to vote for it? This money could have been used for my child's education, and all these kind of criticisms would appear, and that would lose their credibility. So we think we lose hope for the next election as well. Secondly, we think it looks like Trump, the Democrats are making concessions, and it will strengthen the bargaining power of the Trump regime. So every time, ladies and gentlemen, the Democrats try to negotiate on reasonable things like education or like stopping the blocks of trade, ladies and gentlemen, Trump says, oh, if DACA is a part of your political priority, I'm going to stop DACA, and all these kind of things. And we think in these kind of scenarios, people would actually look at the Democrats as being complicit with all the stupid policies of Trump, and that will lose support as well. We think this would actually result in real harms as well. We tell you that people who don't receive education, who don't receive Medicare, or have to be segregated because like the Democrats want strong, would be harmed under the government case. Ladies and gentlemen, we have told you simply that this is a stupid tactics. We shouldn't take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the speech. Next, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to extend their case within the next 7 minutes. Here.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to extend the affirmative case in two ways. So first of all, I'm going to explain to you why the concession to the construction of wall does not severely undermine the goal of the Democrats, why it's aligned with what the Democrats wants to pursue. And second, I'm going to explain the broader political implication of this Democratic concession. But before that, 2 points of rebuttal. So first of all, he refuted back our argumentation by saying that DACA under a Republican administration would not work in its full scale because bureaucrats will not be able to implement this perfectly because they are controlled by the Republican. He completely misunderstands. He don't know how U.S. political system or legislative system works. The efficacy of the implementation of a policy is not contingent upon the ruling party, whether it is a Republican or the Democrat, because those bureaucrats are party independent. They're not controlled directly by the ruling party. The ruling party cannot impose certain political ideologies upon the bureaucrats. So the only thing which might affect the efficacy of this policy and the efficacy of DACA is how much budget that has. And that is why our policy is wonderful, because the motion says a full implementation of the DACA policy, which means of the full-scale budget that is required for the implementation. And that is a trade-off, and that is a negotiation that we want to make. The current negotiation that they're supporting is a DACA reform with a limited budget constraint, and we think that is harmful to implement a full-scale DACA. Second refutation, they said that Republican is basically falling apart, so it is not strategically correct to then align with the Republican policy. Number of responses here. One, unfortunately, Republican is not falling apart because the stock price of the United States has risen since the Trump administration. The average salary has also risen. As a consequence of that, there's still a strong base of support for the Trump administration and basically the Republican from the economic sphere and also corporation and many middle-class American people. Second of all, there are certain successful policies that the Trump administration has actually accomplished. For example, the taxation reform, which benefited the vast majority of middle-class American citizens. For example, remaining a strong position on gun control, which they gave an example. Unfortunately, in U.S. politics, the vast majority of people, nearly 60-70% of the people, does not support gun control, and there is obviously a strong political momentum for organizations from the NRA. So Trump having a consistent stance upon them is actually a positive thing for the Trump administration and the Republican. But thirdly, sit down. Democrats are also fragile and is falling apart basically as a consequence of infighting. The perfect example is the Democratic concession to the budgetary reform that we saw recently. The reason why they had to concede to the budgetary reform by the Republican was because there were a lot of infighting between the politicians in the Democrats, and as a consequence of that, they were at a weaker position. So even if the Republican was falling apart, as they asserted, we think that the Democrats are also falling apart. So there's no advantage there. But firstly, even if there's certain bad image to Trump, like when you look at many polls in the United States, there's still strong Republican support. So even if there's a bad image to Trump, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a bad image to the Republican. So there isn't a guarantee that in the next midterm election, the Democrat will suddenly win and take both houses. So moving on to my first extension, why the concession to the wall is not does not severely undermine the goal of the Democrats. A number of reasons why. First of all, we think that border security and stopping illegal immigrants and drug traffickers is also aligned with the interests of the Democrats, because it is true that the vast majority of human trafficking and drug trafficking occurs in the Mexican-US border. We think that Democrats also have an interest in securing the border and protecting people living in them. Not yet. Second of all, we think that since the United States annual budget is limited and Mexico has publicly announced and declared that they won't pay for the wall, we think this wall will not be the Great Wall of America that Trump announced in the election. It will probably be things such as reinforced fences, an extension of the current wall, or increasing the number of border patrol personnel around the wall. So the efficacy of border patrol and the efficacy of the wall will increase, because now you have an increased number of border patrol personnel. So it's not just going to be just a wall; it's also going to be border patrol and personnel. So we don't think that this is going to severely undermine the U.S. budget and severely burden the U.S. budget as well. But thirdly, we think that Democrats has been historically very unpopular, especially in the southern U.S. region, especially in the border parts of the U.S.-Mexican border. So if the Democrats can now portray a message to the people living in those areas, that they also care about border patrol, that they also care about the security of people living in there, they also care about preventing drug traffickers and human traffickers from coming into the United States, we think that they can have a relative advantage, the popularity that they can gain will necessarily increase. So we can think that in the next midterm, even when you consider about the next midterm election, we think that they can have a relative strategic advantage there as well. Before we move on any further, any points of information?
So you're missing the point about how the Republicans are falling apart. We're talking about traditional Republican supporters falling apart within the Republican Party, because Trump has announced something that is against the traditional Republican Party.
I already gave you a number of reasons why that's not the case. So moving on to my final argumentation, broader political implication of this Democratic concession. We think that right now, the United States political system is in dysfunction, and there's a stagnation and a stalemate between the Republicans and the Democrats. The United States government office shut down again because the Democrat refused concession to the 2018 annual budget. And the reason why this is the case is because the relationship between the Republican and the Democrat has been very hostile, and it has been very difficult for to conduct any bipartisan cooperation, because as a consequence of that heated election in 2016. The concession to this wall would break the ice between the Democrats and the Republican and would allow more bipartisan cooperation. The reason why that is the case is because, as they mentioned, this wall has been a symbolic policy for the Trump administration, and Trump is doing everything to achieve that. So if the Democrats continue to refuse it, we think that Trump would take an even more radical and a harder stance towards the Democrats, undermining any bipartisanship and cooperation. But if we accept this and if we concede to the wall, we think that Trump would have an incentive to be less hostile towards the Democrats and achieve future bipartisanship. Moreover, we think that we have to analyze how the public, the voters, will view this. People now blame both the Republicans and the Democrats for stagnating the United States politics. But if the Democrats now make a major concession to the policy, people will now think, now since the Democrats now made a concession, now it's the turn for the Republicans to make certain concession as well. So as a consequence of that, we think that this is going to lead to more bipartisanship. So why do we think that bipartisanship is important? It is important because there are many important and urgent issues that the government of the United States needs to focus and solve. For example, the North Korean crisis and many foreign policy crises, including Iraq. Solving crippling welfare programs in the United States deserve a dire and urgent attention by the United States political system, which is being undermined as a consequence of bipartisanship not being continued. The motion must end.
Thank you very much for the speech. Next I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Well, I have many issues to talk about, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'm going to talk about effectiveness of the DACA policy that the proposition is trying to assume. Second of all, I'd like to talk about whether Republican or Democrat, which is perceived by the public to be more fragile, and why we think Democrat has a chance to win the election. Thirdly, I'd like to talk about the urgency of the DACA. I have to question the contextualization coming from Hayakawa. As new substantives, I'd like to talk about two things. First of all, about the even if the DACA is going to be implemented and why it's going to be much more counterproductive. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the why by just having sort of like bipartisan cooperation is going to be much toxic for the betterment of the Democrat, including all rebuttals. First of all, about the effectiveness of the DACA policy. So Deputy Prime Minister Uchiyama-san came up and told us, well, opposition doesn't understand the system of bureaucracy, right? But so the politician or administration cannot control the bureaucracy and things like that. We don't really think so. I think this is not true. Because for example, when it comes to the visa application for the immigrants coming to the United States has been more tightened up because after the election of the Donald Trump, Mr. Speaker. And also when it comes to, for example, application of the crime application of for example, like Obamacare in a Republican state, then the state itself makes the application process more complex, so that even poor people have to give up accessing and even applying for it. So just because the rule and legal framework is actually there, it doesn't mean that it's going to be genuinely implemented in each circumstances. As long as the Republican is taking control over that process, what can be assumed is that actually the shrinking the target of the DACA, or actually, overly checking the people so that most of the minority who deserve care are actually swept out by this reform. I think this is totally ineffective and counterproductive. Second point, so about the characterization of the Republican and Democratic Party. So the government actually characterized the Republican Party is doing great. For example, like stock price high, tax reform, gun control, things like that. I have many examples to counter that. For example, first of all, about the tax reform, right? Tax reform is only benefiting the rich, huge corporation, 1% of the company, and also 1% of the population, which is essentially damaging the people. And also, some of the company are actually falling down because of the Trump policy. For example, Trump recently introduced a trade bloc about, for example, like importing iron from other countries, or actually importing the goods for the solar panel, which is actually a big industry in the United States. But essentially what happened, it actually increased the cost of production for a domestic company, which essentially hurt the individual employee within that corporation. This is actually creating massive outrage against the Trump because he doesn't understand the situation of the economy at all. Also, when it comes to the gun control, right, Uchiyama-san says gun control is a good thing because now Trump is supporting the gun control. Yes, maybe. However, the opinion of the Republican Party itself is actually different from the President Trump. Because Trump is just himself saying that he needs gun control. However, the most of the Republican Party are actually opposing the gun control itself. Because it has been the campaign against Obama administration, Trump was actually accusing. We think this analysis is totally false, and rather it actually creates the huge imbalance within the Republican Party and its constituency. Democrat, maybe they describe a bit of like internal discourse about the budget, but internal discourse about budget always happen. We think that kind of minor discussion isn't so much material compared with the huge obstacle and difficulty Trump administration has caused. That's why we are saying that it's much more likely for Democrat people to take over the Congress and take over the majority that have the right to block certain bills proposed by the Trump president. Also, they actually propose the vote that's more likely to be passed under our scenario. No, thank you. Third of all, so about the characterization comes from Hayakawa-san about the illegal immigrants, right? We have to recognize that DACA is subject to the child of illegal immigrants, right? Which means that this family is a certain level of economic stability. They have a father, they have a mother, and some of the DACA subjects that these people are actually graduate from the university, Mr. Speaker, that these people are maybe struggling for finding a job because of their lack of IDs. However, we cannot just simply characterize all those people who are desperate behind the poverty line, Mr. Speaker. And also, in case there's a huge humanitarian crisis like hurricane hitting, then we can actually allocate special budget in order to save them just for the humanitarian purposes. So, Madam Speaker, we do not think so. No. So moving on to my constructive. First of all, so even if there is a certain level of the cooperation, why it's going to be much more toxic? As my partner clearly characterized, that this actually gives the bargaining chip for the Republican Party, because if Democrat thinks that DACA is a very paramount importance for those parties, then the Republican take over that and capitalize them as a very good silver bullet or great weapon. So whenever they try to pass, for example, racist policy, for example, blocking Islam or actually introducing more of the trade law, then Democrats cannot stand up against them. Yes.
Citizens are losing faith to both mainstream parties because they do nothing, because they're bureaucratic, do not make any concession to counterparts. There is a huge logical jump on your side to say the fall of the Republican Party automatically connects to the support of Democrats.
Okay, for the same situation happened for the Trump election, right? There are a bunch of undecided voters are actually judging them by them seeing the number of the failure which party has been caused. Then, in these circumstances, the undecided voters are seeing Trump administration is more failing than the Democrat actually. Okay, so what we actually told you that since the Democrats have to give the bargaining chip for the Republicans is in the position that more easily to abuse its power, and that creates much more harm, for example, to the racial minorities, for example, to the poor workers within the corporation. And the horrible thing is that the public are perceiving this incident, it is complicit to, the Democrats are also complicit to it, because Democrats didn't have enough power to stop that, because they already give up this issue for the sake of the stupid war, Mr. Speaker. We don't think this is really benefiting, because we are in the position that we are naturally better than the Trump administration and the Republican Party. And also, we are actually losing the trust because of this complicity. That's why we are extremely damaging for this situation. For all those reasons, we're very proud. So, Paul.
Thank you very much for your speech. Next, I call upon the government whip here.
Mr. Speaker, 2 points of clarification. Their benefit is very speculative. Their argument is like, maybe Democrats can win the next election, but that's very ambiguous social outcome, ambiguous political outcome. There's no guarantee that if we do not make concession, that Democrats will 100% win the next election. As opposed to this ambiguity of benefit, the protection of vulnerable people and undocumented children, a very explicit and tangible outcome that's surely acquired by the implementation of this policy. So if we compare the benefit and the benefit in terms of the tangibility or expectability and also the urgency, because DACA will expire next July, in terms of these three criteria, our benefit is overwhelmingly better and prioritized in this debate. We would like to hear any counter standard of comparison from the other side of the house, because their argumentation is not really compelling and just speculative. Second of all, their approach to protect DACA people and undocumented children is when assuming that Democrats win the next election, Democrats can implement the policy. No, even if Democrats win the next election, there's no guarantee that DACA policy will be accepted, because the president is able to exert veto to specific policy. So even at the best scenario of the other side of the house, there's no guarantee that DACA will be implemented under their side of the house. So only our approach, making concession right now, is able to protect undocumented children who are suffering enormously in the status quo. Based on the 3 levels of clash points. 1, why DACA won't pass if we insist rejection? Why DACA policy won't pass if Democrats insist refusing wars? The first response is a feasibility problem. Like, even if we implement this policy, there's no actual bureaucratic mechanism to genuinely implement this policy. There are 3 rebuttals. 1, this methodology is a stupid idea. If DACA policy is not implemented, then all the harms that they have provided won't appear either. So we need to reasonably assume that policy is implementable. As Motion said, this debate is about on the context of full legalization. Secondly, the Republicans have an incentive to implement this policy, because as they said, for the Republicans, making concession is beneficial. So Republican wants to make concession in the future. If the Republican just tell a lie and deceive Democrats, and the Democrats will no longer engage with the future concession against Republicans. So politicians and Republicans have incentive to make some level of concessions for the future political strategy. Number 3, Republicans have incentive to cater to voters. If Republicans lie, we don't actually implement the policy, that will undermine their reputation. It's very less likely that voters won't choose Republican politicians in the next election. Therefore, there are reasonable incentive for the Republican politicians to implement this policy in exchange for their own benefit. And another thing is, even in the best case scenario, the application process becomes very strict. Therefore, only limited number of people or a type of people will be saved. I think that's good. The state is implementing very strict standard policy to guarantee the security or background of these individuals. It's very good messages for public that we strictly select the application process. I think that's rather good benefit. If you have any point of information.
So you're missing the point again. The motion says the full legislation of DACA, which includes background checks. And what we have provided to you is that because of the twisted bureaucracy, that background check process is going to be screwed.
No, you need to prove why bureaucrats have incentive to halfway implement a policy. We have given you a number of reasons why there are incentive for politicians as well as the bureaucrat, as they have to cater to political popularity of the voters. If they do not actually implement the policy, that undermines the popularity to win the next election. You need to explain the counter disincentive for this bureaucrat to something opposed willy-nilly the concession. Moving on to the second issue, the impact on the midterm elections. Their assumption is that Republican is weakening right now, so if we keep the status quo, there are high chances that Democrats can win the next election. Trump is losing its power. No, that's not the case. There are several rebuttals. One, Trump presidency is hiring another alternative consultancy, another alternative people, because there are so many people who have incentive to work for presidency. There are many good human resources who are eager to work with the presidency. It's very easy for Trump to replace the consultancy or good bureaucrats in the status quo. Secondly, about the gun control issues, their response is it's just individual opinion of Trump, and other politicians in the Democrats are opposing that. No, that's missed the point. When the Trump showed the moderate stance, the voters and the public and then citizens change their mind that they will actually start to support Trump presidency. Therefore, the gun control impact is strengthening Trump presidency as the moderate voters there are starting to support Trump presidency. That's the effect of gun control. Internal political conflicts in the Republican is not really relevant to the motion. And number 3, about the economic growth, my partner explained that there are economic benefits. Therefore, rich people and middle class people and corporations starting to support Trump presidency. And their response is there are some the small and medium sized corporations who are harmed by trade blocking and policy. Even if some corporations lose benefit under Trump presidency, it doesn't automatically mean that those corporations start to support Democrats instead. Maybe those corporations will start to support politicians within Republican Party instead of Trump, and that's the consequence. Therefore, conclusion is that Republican is not losing power. Trump presidency is not really weakening the status quo. Therefore, if we just keep the status quo, there's no chances that Democrats will win the next election. Another assumption is that this policy concession is undermining the credibility because of the symbol of stupidity. One, not making concession is rather perceived as a stupid action because you are actually weakening or lowering the probability of winning the next election. When the Democrats show its stance or show up practical consequences to save undocumented children, to save humanitarian crisis, to strengthen the security border around Mexico, that's great benevolent messages for the public. The public start to think that the Democrat is strategic rather than stupid in order to materialize near-term outcome for the public utility. Therefore, the symbol of stupidity argument is rather opposite in this specific debate. Secondly, they say this money that are spent for wars could be spent for something else. But that's the nature of tax allocation. That's the nature of allocation of budget. In any cases, if you spend this money for victims of a hurricane, that money could be spent for something else. So that's value neutral phenomenon, not necessarily a harm in the first place. Moving on to the final argumentation. Final issue, why concession won't harm Democrats at all? They said the deputies matter is we are giving you bargaining tip to Republicans, right? That's the status quo. The Republicans already are not making any concession or not cooperating with the Democrats at all. Therefore, there is marginal distinction even if we take this policy. But second of all, you are exacerbating the polarization by not making concession at all. You are systematically undermining the possibility of any bipartisan approach by not making any concession in status quo. You are undermining the ability of any political party to implement any policy. We're happy to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech. Next, I call upon the opposition reply. Here, No, opposition would.
Okay, thank you everyone. This debate clash is quite simple. One, which is better for the entire United States, the main argument from government bench. Second, which is better for and which is better caters the interest of the Democrats Party. Before that, let me clarify some weird assumption on government bench. One is about this. Actually, this plan doesn't create a full form of war for several reasons. They explain. One, because budget is limited. Two, fence or sending guard is enough for the Trump's interest. The several responses here. One, actually establishing fence is the current situation where the United States have already achieved, meaning this plan which Trump tried to push forward should be the expansion and the complete wall rather than just creating fence. Two, we think Trump requires a full wall as well as Democrats requires full DACA policy, meaning if both cannot compromise, meaning their plan to push for DACA also cannot be pushed forward, meaning anyway, Democrats have to compromise for the larger scale of the wall. And then the further argument and response from government is like this. Bureaucrats are independent and they will make good bills for complete DACA. Two responses. One, as we have told you, the bureaucrats are also easily influenced by the politicians. They are chosen by politicians or even presidents have huge supervising power over these kind of bureaucrats. We don't think those bureaucrats are completely independent to the extent that they can independently make the complete bill for the DACA. Two, they explain Republicans have incentive to voluntarily compromise because if they don't compromise, in the future they think they will be beaten by the Democrats. We don't think so because if under their side of the house, the clear relationship between Democrats and Republicans will like this. Like Democrats have already compromised a huge part of the principle to accept the variety by rejecting the construction of the wall. Then those Republicans will just take it easy that those Democrats can compromise in any cases. If it requires, they will compromise. We don't think those Republicans will have incentive to compromise. Rather, they will take an aggressive stance again and again. Then the conclusion is here. We think even if Trump compromised at this moment for the full DACA policy in exchange for the full construction of the wall, in the long term, those Republicans or Trump's administration who strengthen the bargaining chip we require again to continue the full construction of the walls. For example, by decreasing the budget for education welfare, they try to achieve the full construction of the wall, or even those rights might result to decrease the scale of the DACA because that might constrain the budget. Then in this case, Democrats cannot concur or cannot counter to this kind of requirement for the Trump administration. Then this is quite detrimental for those people. Okay.
if Republicans already taking advantage of weak position of Democrats to a great extent, tell me what are the chances that Democrat will win the next election? That's very marginal probability if your context is true.
We are not saying in this moment Republicans are greatly awesome compared to Democrats. We are saying that now Republicans are getting weaker and weaker. So we have to take the continuous stance to wait the time that those Republicans will be overridden by the Democrats. That's quite simple stance. One, which is better for the entire United States. The arguments from their side is quite simple. One, without DACA, some illegal immigrants will resort to the criminals or gangs. Two, when immigrants applied for DACA, they can contribute to the IT industry. What they lack here is a comparative analysis, because we have given to you the budget which could have been used for the education or welfare or training program for the IT workers have to be used for the construction of the walls. Then let's be comparative. Even if some part of the DACA or some part of illegal immigrants who decided to stay in the United States rather than going back over the original country might contribute to in the IT industry somehow without explaining concrete logic. But rather on the outside of the house, we can use this huge amount of budget, like trillions of dollars, to train these kind of education and IT programmers, which can be obviously more beneficial for the entire United States. Moreover, we have given to you why this is actually beneficial for the entire United States. One, actually this kind of money not only can be used for the poor education, but also can be used for the poor people. Actually, this is more direct effect that we can expect in this short term. Number two, if Democrats compromise the Republicans, as I told you, those Trump will expand their own other supervising power towards Democrats. Then we cannot hinder Trump administration's real stupid policy. Like he might try to block the Islam again, even though he was rejected, or this kind of real policy which can easily harm the citizens can be easily adopted exclusively under the House. But third of all, because regardless of the completion of the war, like 50% or 60%, any Mexican government will easily antagonize the United States government. Then a huge part of the trade peer as a Mexican country will try to decrease the trade scale with the United States. This is obviously damaging for the employment or economic scale of the United States. Then the conclusion is simple. Actually, outside is better for the United States in the world entirely. Then their main argument to adopt this plan is already failing. The second, which is better catering the interest of the Democratic Party. They argue that Democrats are also failing. The only reason was like this: because Democrats compromised budget. We think under their third house, the momentum of the Democrats will be rather worsen under their third house. The reason is quite simple: to compromise to general budget and to compromise the basic principle of that party to be generous to the diversity by opposing war. This scale of compromise is extremely totally different. Then we might compromise the budget, but we will take the continuous aggressive stance to cater to continue our basic principle to oppose the war because we want the diversity as a Democrat. But they are compromising the basic principle of the Democrats. Then actually momentum of the Democrats will hugely decrease exclusively under that of the House. Then they told us actually Republicans are not decreasing their momentum, and the only reason from Uchiyama-san is the stock price and salaries are increasing under their side of the house. We don't see. So first of all, we think the stock price and salary is actually extremely fluctuated because Trump takes many weird stance suddenly intervening the Palestine problems. That we don't think under Trump regimes the stock price and salaries are stable. Then meaning the supporter of Trump administration is not so stable. Then those Republicans are actually failing in the status quo. Moreover, too. For all of these reasons, we think actually Democrats are getting more and more momentum in this current context. Then as Democrats, we have to continue the current situation. Moreover, even for the United States, actually outside is better. We are happy to oppose.
Thank you very much for the speech. Next, I call upon the opposition reply to conclude this debate. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to talk about two things to clear up this debate. First of all, about the practicality, which was the main criteria for government, what they want to see. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the support for the Republicans and support for the Democrats, how this policy is going to change and make things worse for Democrats, and why that is a principle we should pursue. So let's look at this issue about practicality. First of all, they didn't really say why practicality is necessarily the criteria of winning this debate in the first place. So that fails in the beginning. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we told you about how the DACA, even though it is in a full scale legalized, because it is legalized with the background check system, that the process is going to be screwed. The response we heard was that Republicans have incentive to do good bureaucracy. Like why? We didn't see it because they are simply winning in parliament. We didn't really hear a clear logic of why that is the case. But secondly, we told you from as well that the head of ministry is also politically decided. We don't really see that their case really stands and actually gets practical benefits. Now then, they told us that our case also doesn't achieve pragmatic benefits because we got, the President Trump will always veto against what the Democratic Party would, the Parliament would say. But ladies and gentlemen, that's just not a good enough response because we said Democrats are winning elections, ladies and gentlemen. We never said only parliamentary elections. Maybe there's a good chance of winning the presidential elections as well, for all the reasons we have mentioned. So we think we can have a great expectation of us winning these practical benefits in the future sometimes against, if you make concessions right now, like their side, we can't make any concessions. We can't win any good policies. So second issue about support for both parties. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is we think that we have clearly analyzed the context of this debate in where Republicans are now winning because even though they are shit, because people thought that Democrats looked even shitter in the previous elections, ladies and gentlemen, and that we have learned from that story, and therefore we are opposing this policy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they have told us that the Republicans are supported already. So our context of it's being fragmented is wrong. That is our nuance, ladies and gentlemen. And we told you about floating votes, ladies and gentlemen. We think they are by undecided voters, and they cast votes based on what they see in the media, and therefore it is important for the Democrats to appeal to these people. Also, they missed the point about the Republicans falling apart because we have told you that Trump's words on gun controls contradicts the traditional gun liberation policies of the Republican Party, and that is why they are falling apart. So their response about how people like gun control is just missing the point. We didn't really see they weren't good enough in cutting our arguments. But secondly, let's look at how Democrats will be gaining support. Ladies and gentlemen, the first thing they have told us that Democrats are also falling apart because of infights on budget. We told you from Take that infight on budget is a usual thing. People are used to it. People don't make decisions based on that in the first place. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, that's not what we support. We think it was a clear implication from the opposition bench that we support a solid, consolidated Democratic Party, which would not be falling apart and causing infights. Ladies and gentlemen, they told us Democrats will gain power by conceding with the walls because walls are just fences, ladies and gentlemen, and it's pretty cheap. Now, we have told you from ourselves that the fences already exist, and what Trump was saying, building a literal wall. So it's not good enough for them to just shift the burden on the other side of the debate. Secondly, they have told us that DACA saves people, and therefore it leads to the support of the Democrats. Ladies and gentlemen, we have told you from the beginning of this debate that for that argument to stand, they need to tell us why this DACA is the single most important political issue before the election. We have given you other important policies the Democrats has always wished for, and that is good enough. Ladies and gentlemen, we think still this is a stupid policy, stupid tactics rather. We beg to oppose.
Thank you very much for your speech, and lastly a call for the government reply. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, although today's affirmative team was able to probably suggest that now the Republican is getting weaker, the negative team were ultimately unable to explain how the non-concession of this policy would actually strengthen the Democrats and increase the possibility of the Democrats winning. Everyone thought that Hillary Clinton would have won the 2016 election, and we were wrong, and Trump won the election. It is very difficult to fundamentally speculate the outcome of an election. So the fundamental problem of the negative case is all their benefits stand on this very fragile assumption that somehow the Democrats will win the midterm election. When you compare in terms of tangibility, we think we take today's debate. So first issue that I would like to talk about is the issue of how to implement DACA. So what we heard from the negative is that DACA under an affirmative concession won't be implemented in its full effect because of bureaucratic mismanagement. We already gave you a number of responses. First, they neglect the spirit of the motion, which says the full legalization of DACA. But second of all, the Republicans also have an incentive to effectively implement DACA. One, because they fear breakup future bipartisanship, but two, they fear public backlash. There was no response from that. The second response that we gave you is that notice that the negative's benefit stands on this very fragile assumption that the Democrats would actually win the next midterm election. We told you that the possibility of winning the next midterm election was quite dubious since the stock price has risen, the average salary has risen, the Democrat is also entangled in infighting between politicians. But fourthly, we have explained to you, even if the Democrats win the midterm election, Donald Trump is still the president, because just in case you didn't know, the midterm election doesn't actually change the president, right? So as a consequence of that, Donald Trump can still execute presidential veto to the legislation proposed by the Democrats. There was no response from the opposition whip. We think this was crucial. So when you compare in terms of tangibility, even if DACA under our policy may not be perfectly implemented, at least some portion of it will be implemented. That is far better than no DACA, which would happen this July. By comparison, the DACA implementation of the negative team stands on this very fragile assumption that the Democrats would actually win the next midterm. But even if that is the case, and even if they win the next midterm election, they were unable to answer the question of presidential veto, ladies and gentlemen. When you compare in terms of the tangibility of the measure, we think that the affirmative takes this comparison. So moving to the second issue, is concession bad? So what we have given you from the deputy speech is that we have proven to you how the construction of wall is also a benefit for the Democrats and the United States interests as a whole, even if it costs $1 billion. And there was no direct refutation on that. So the negative team failed to also explain how the construction of wall harmed the interests of the Democrats and harmed the interests of the United States. They were unable to do that. So we are fundamentally conceding to something that is good, and we don't think there's anything bad about that. And we have proven to you the necessity of expanding the current wall. We need to reinforce current fences, which they seem to misunderstand the nuance. The current fence is not enough. There are certain loopholes, there are certain portion of the geography that is not covered. We're going to expand it. We're going to also reinforce the number of border patrol that we're going to have, ladies and gentlemen. That's a huge difference with the status quo, which they miss the nuance of. Finally, they responded that it's bad to concede to the wall because this wall was a symbolic policy for Donald Trump. Now, if you won't concede to any policy that Donald Trump is supporting, then there is no possibility of any bipartisanship in the future. I have, in my deputy speech, explained the importance of bipartisanship, especially in today's context, where we have to, where the Democrats and the Republicans needs to cooperate on many issues such as foreign policy and including tax reform. And we have proven to you that if the Democrats concede to the wall, it is more likely that the bipartisanship cooperation would work, because now one, that would break up the ice with Trump, but two, the vast majority of people now think that it is now the time for the Republican to make certain concessions, and we think that as a consequence of that, bipartisanship and the United States political system would benefit from this. And that is why the affirmative wins.
Thank you very much for this round.
Peace.